John McCain went on the Sunday shows yesterday to lament the fact that the U.S. isn't intervening in Ukraine. Let's watch.
It sounds like things are getting even worse there. How do you read what's happening there, and what do we need to do now?
I believe that the German Chancellor and the President of France legitimized for the first time in 70 years the dismemberment of a country in Europe. It's shameful. Vladimir Putin has not paid any price. Even the ceasefire was violated until he achieved his objective of that vital rail link. He'll pull back some now, and the next will be Mariupol so that he can establish a land bridge to Crimea. And honestly, it's terrible. The Ukrainians aren't asking for American boots on the ground. That's not the question here. They're asking for weapons to defend themselves, and they are being slaughtered, and their military is being shattered. This is a shameful chapter. I'm ashamed of my country, I'm ashamed of my president, and I'm ashamed of myself that I haven't done more to help these people.
Just a wee bit dramatic there, aren't we, Johnny? So, understand that the situation in Ukraine, in my opinion, is very complicated. And there's been a slow escalation at every step of the way. Myself and other observers have been going, no. And both sides, unfortunately, have been escalating the conflict. But I disagree with McCain in terms of arming the Ukrainians. Now, we did a segment on this a little while ago, probably like a week or 2 weeks ago, and there was actually a lot of people actually disagreed with me and disliked what I had to say about the situation. But understand, the reason why it doesn't make sense, in my opinion, to arm the Ukrainians is that, first of all, it won't work. Like, what do you think is going to happen? It doesn't matter how many small arms you give the Ukrainians, they're not going to be able to beat the Russian military. Anybody who knows anything about world politics understands that and knows that. So it's just a pipe dream. Even if we did arm them, it's not like, therefore, next Wednesday they're going to be able to defeat the Russians. It's just not going to happen. So, first of all, it won't work, and that's pretty much the only argument I need in terms of why I don't want to arm them. But number two, I think it escalates the conflict further. See, the problem is with geopolitics, everybody thinks like, well, I'm going to think about how I would react and not think about it like it's a chessboard and a chess game and think, what then will the opposition do? See, a lot of idiots are playing chess here. Checkers here, and John McCain is one of them, where he's like, what I would do is I'd arm the Ukrainians, I'll fix the situation right there and fix it. Yeah, that's right. Right, because Vladimir Putin's going to see that and he's going to go, oh, well, now that the Ukrainians are armed, I guess I'm going to stop anything else that I planned on doing. He'd be like, get the fuck out of here. Are you kidding me now? I'm going to escalate the situation even further. So it's not going to work, and it's going to escalate the conflict, and it's going to get the America more involved and the West more involved. So why would we do it? But again, to go back to the issue itself of Ukraine, here's why it's so complex. You essentially have half of Ukraine wants to be Western and wants to be more European. And they essentially did a coup of Yanukovych and the pro-Eastern government, pro-Russian government, and that's when Russia stepped in and said, fuck that. The other half of the country still wants to be pro-Russian, so we're going to make it that way, whether or not NATO agrees with us, whether or not the West agrees with us. And that's when he essentially annexed Crimea and staged a vote which allows them to secede and basically become part of Russia again. And look, was it staged? Absolutely. There was no option on the ballot. So yes, it was staged. But at the same time, even if they didn't cheat, they would have won. See, anybody who understands the ethnic breakdown in the region in Crimea understands that they did essentially want to go back with Russia. So that's why it's such a complex situation, is that half the country really does want to be more Western, half the country really does want to be more Eastern and be more on the side of Russia. And then the question is, well, what should the U.S. do about it, and what should NATO do about it, and how would Russia respond? And here's the point in my mind that I thought was devastating, that really solidifies my gut belief that we should be non-interventionist and stay out. Maybe do some economic sanctions and stuff like that, which I'm fine with. But think about it like this. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, when you had Russia essentially get an ally country right near Florida. I mean, Cuba's right there. Can't you see Cuba from Florida on a day where it's clear? Like, it's right there. So Russia had an ally in Cuba, which was right there, right near Florida, right near the United States, and they put weapons in there. And we viewed that in America as, oh my God, they're escalating the situation. It's a clear sign of aggression, and this cannot be allowed. This is, a flex of muscle that is inappropriate on the world stage, and they're threatening the American people. Well, that's exactly how Vladimir Putin feels about the situation. He wakes up one day, at one point, Ukraine is essentially a buffer zone between Russia and the West, which he views as hostile. And then he wakes up one day, and one of the countries in the buffer zone, Ukraine, which is pro-Russian at the point in time, there's a coup, and there's a pro-Western government there, and there's American involvement and Western involvement in the, with the people who are pro-Western in the region. And he's like, whoa! This is essentially the same thing that happened with the Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse. You have a country right next to Russia, which is now pro-Western, pro-NATO, pro-America, and there's weapons in there. So he views the situation the same way that JFK viewed it here when there were Russian weapons and there was a Russian ally in Cuba. So we need to, this is always my point, man. This is something I try to stress on the show all the time. You always have to try to view the situation through the eyes of your opponent. Because you have to see, very rarely in this world, it happens, it certainly happens, but very rarely in the world do you have a situation that's, pure right and pure wrong. This side is true and this side is false. Usually, with human interactions, it's usually very complex and nuanced, and there's all these different angles to it, and you really need to sit down and talk and figure out where each side is coming from so that you don't make the same mistakes of history and further escalate the situation until there's a fucking war. So what would I do on this issue? I'm in favor of how Obama's handled it so far. He's increased sanctions slowly when necessary, but what I would do at this point is I would say, let's actually sit down and have a conversation with Putin and the Russian government and see where they're at and see exactly what's going on here in Ukraine and see how we can resolve the situation. There was a so-called ceasefire that was negotiated about a week or 2 weeks ago. It didn't work. I knew it wasn't going to work. I called it at the time. You can go back and check on Twitter. I was talking about it endlessly. So the answer is the sanctions like we've done so far, but also now it's time for the next step to sit down and talk to Putin and see exactly what's happening here and then reevaluate from there. But what I wouldn't do is the John McCain / John Wayne Chuck Norris approach of, just give weapons and then I'll take care of the situation, because if you give them weapons, Russia will just go away and it won't escalate the conflict. Oh, that's exactly what it'll do? Oops.